What's up guys, Artem MMA Analysis here on the We Want Picks channel. I'm going to be talking about Contender Series 2022, week number 8, and I'm looking forward to this card. It's a pretty tough card to kind of predict, I reckon, especially compared to last week, but you've got a lot of undefeated prospects on the card. You've got a couple of really big names coming in. You've got Trevor coming in off a first round KO over a former UFC fighter, Ikram Aliskerov, the guy that gave Khamzat Chimaev, I guess, his toughest test before he come into the UFC, and Farid Basharat, the younger brother of a UFC fighter, Javid Basharat. Now, let's just talk about week number 7 really quickly before we get into the card. I went pretty good, man. I went 4-1 on picks. My one wrong pick was Jimmy Lawson against Carl Williams, man. Carl Williams come in on 10 days notice, super short notice, upper weight class, and he out-wrestled Jimmy Lawson, who had a D1 Penn State national wrestling background. So good for Carl Williams, man. Honestly, that was a crazy fight. It was frustrating for me to watch, but it was a good fight. Ismail Bonfim, I picked him to win. He was a very slight underdog against Narimon Abasov, who was 28-3 at the time. Bonfim won. He was just a more technical striker, as I did say in my prediction. And Teresa Blader out-wrestled, out-grappled Naya Amaya for 3 rounds. Didn't get the contract. Very surprised. I know the performance wasn't incredible, but Blader's got a win over Lucy Pudilova, and at the time, Blader was 18 years old, and Pudilova was just starting her run back into the UFC after initially getting cut. I feel like Dana White, it's so frustrating, he needs to look at the backgrounds of these fighters before he decides to sign them, yes or no. Teresa Blader was also coming off a win over a girl that was 9-1. Blader is not inexperienced like Dana White seems to think, and she also had an undefeated amateur record too. Frustrating. I think Blader should have been signed. Is what it is. Gabriel Bonfim got signed 13-0, got a first round submission. It was crazy though, he was in a guillotine, and then he moved into a Von Flue. Very impressive stuff. Well, I expected the fight to play out on the feet, I did, but yeah, as soon as the fight hit the mat, Trey Waters was going for a guillotine. Bonfim ended up kind of transitioning into a Von Flue choke while Trey Waters was getting a guillotine on Bonfim. It was a weird finish. It was crazy. I liked it. I thought it was awesome. And then Vitor Petrino and Rodolfo Bellato kind of went to war for a couple of rounds in the main event. Vitor Petrino ends up knocking out Rodolfo Bellato. Poor Rodolfo Bellato. He now has 2 losses by KO to the same guy in Vitor Petrino. But it is what it is. He got signed. I think Vitor Petrino potentially could make something happen in the division. He's a very young fighter. 7-0 right now with a couple of good wins on his record. I think that we could see something come out of Petrino and both the Bonfim brothers' careers. But let's just get straight into the predictions. It's about 3 minutes in. Let's make something happen. And the first fight of the night, Brandon Lewis versus Daniel Marcos, is the most difficult fight to predict on the entire card. Daniel Marcos is 12-0, but he hasn't fought since 2019. He hasn't fought for almost 3 years now. And even then, I was watching this guy's fight tape. He was 12-0, fighting guys with really good records like 10-5, 5-4, not so much, but 8-2, 7-1, and then 5-3 again. But like, these are fights from years ago, and he hasn't fought for about 3 years now. I'm assuming it's because of some sort of injury. He did pull out of a fight a couple of years ago due to injury, and has pulled out of fights in the past due to injury as well. So maybe there's something to go along with that. But Daniel Marcos, from what I was seeing in the fight tape, he's a big guy for 135. Like, he was 5'7", and when I was watching him fight Gaston Manzo, which you can find on YouTube pretty easily, you can find this fight, and he looked massive compared to Gaston Manzo, who was listed at 5'5" on Tapology. And yeah, Marcos kind of picked him apart with his kickboxing. It looks really good, and that's kind of what he does bring to the table, is a good kickboxing base. He does throw a lot of leg kicks. He throws a lot of front kicks to the body as well. But when I'm talking about Daniel Marcos, I think you gotta understand, I'm talking about Daniel Marcos from about 2.5 years ago, and he was like 26, 27 years old at that point. Now, he's probably made so many improvements, and he might look like a completely different fighter to the fighter that he was a couple of years ago. So that's why I'm so iffy on this whole fight, because Marcos hasn't fought for so long. He hasn't fought the greatest competition in the world. I know they're great records, but if you look at them, they're not as technical as a lot of regional guys are in 2021, I guess, in 2022, 2021, I guess you could say. But Brandon Lewis, he's coming off a win after losing to Mo Miller on the Contender Series. I guess that loss hasn't aged super well. And what did give me a lot of lack of confidence in this matchup is Mo Miller in that matchup. He's a wrestler, he's a grappler, but he was landing big shots on Brandon Lewis in that one there. So Mo Miller was able to find some really good shots. And if Mo Miller can, then Daniel Marcos probably can find some really good shots himself. But I'm so reserved on picking Daniel Marcos. He hasn't fought for 2.5 years. Even then, he wasn't amazing me in the fight tape from what I was seeing. I thought that I was going to see a much more technical kickboxer, a much more just this and that, and I just didn't quite see it. I think I see a little bit more out of Brandon Lewis. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's the better grappler. And I think that he really should look to use the wrestling and the grappling in this matchup here. Surprise Daniel Marcos in the first round, because he is fighting for the first time in 2.5 years. If Brandon Lewis is able to start fast, use some wrestling, use some grappling, surprise Marcos in the first round, I think he should be able to take over the fight. I'm picking Brandon Lewis to win this fight. I'm picking Brandon Lewis to win a decision. In this matchup here, it's also worth noting he's not the most active guy in the world either. He took about 3 or 4 years off between 2 LFA fights, and then he fought Mo Miller. Mo Miller beat him. Kind of is what it is, but he kind of bounced back since then. But I think that Brandon Lewis just should be the more technical guy in there. He should beat Daniel Marcos. I'm not confident. It's very hard to pick because he hasn't fought for 2.5 years, but even then, all of his fights were in Peru under the same organization, and all of his opponents look to be a lot smaller than him, and it's just kind of a weird fight to pick. I'm going to be going with Lewis by decision. I think he's going to be an underdog as well. I mean, Marcos is 12-0. That's an amazing record, but I was watching the fights and I just wasn't incredibly impressed. So, yeah, give me Brandon Lewis in the first fight of the night. I think it's a 50-50 matchup, man. It's just so tough to call that one. And now in the second fight of the night, you've got Bruna Brasil taking on Marnic Mann here. And I'm going to be going with Bruna Brasil. She's going to be the much bigger fighter out of the two. She stands at 5'6". Marnic Mann stands at 5 foot. And they both usually do fight at 115 pounds. But this fight's at 125, and that is going to benefit Bruna Brasil in this matchup here. Marnic Mann, I would say, is probably going to be the one looking to wrestle, looking to grapple, because I would say that Bruna Brasil really does have a pretty significant striking advantage in this matchup. And it's a huge step up in competition for Marnic Mann. This girl recently came off a split decision win over a girl that was 1-1. She did beat a girl that was 4-1. Before that, she wasn't beating the best girls in the world, and neither was Bruna Brasil to Marnic Mann's credit. But Bruna Brasil's coming off a win over an undefeated 5-0 fighter, Yasmin Castano, in LFA. And before that, she wasn't beating the best competition, to be fair. But I think that Bruna Brasil's at least got experience against better competition than Marnic Mann has. And Marnic Mann can have success. Bruna Brasil's takedown defense isn't that great, but it is because she does have good jiu-jitsu, and she can throw up submissions off her back if she really does need to, and she can threaten with submissions from her back as well. But I think for the most part, if Bruna Brasil's stronger than Marnic Mann in the clinch and in the takedown wrestling sort of positions, I think she should be able to keep the fight on the feet and just pick apart Marnic Mann at range. I think she's just that much better of a striker. I think that Bruna Brasil should get the job done by a decision in this matchup here. Just pick apart Marnic Mann from range and win a decision that way. I'm going to be picking Brasil to keep the fight on the feet. Marnic Mann's going to be looking for takedowns. I don't think she gets them, so I'm going to side with Brasil to win a kickboxing fight in this one here. And in the next fight of the night, you've got Malik Lewis taking on Trevor Peek. And I'm going to be open and honest, man. If Trevor Peek isn't able to knock out Malik Lewis in the first round, I think Malik Lewis is very live to win this fight. And I am picking Malik Lewis to win the fight. Trevor Peek, man, coming off a pretty crazy KO streak in his pro career. He's 6-0 with 6 KOs, most of them in the first round. In fact, most of them actually at welterweight, and one of the fights actually at a catch weight of 180 pounds, which is pretty crazy, and he is coming off a KO win over Conor Worthy at 155 pounds, his first fight at 155 pounds, might I add as well. But you might look at that win and be like, man, former UFC fighter, that's amazing. Conor Worthy now has 10 losses. 9 of those 10 losses by KO, which is a little bit concerning, to be fair. But it also just does tell you that Conor Worthy is quite able to be KO'd. I mean, 9 KO losses and 10 losses is just not a great look at all. But I am quite impressed from what I am seeing in Trevor Peek. He throws with power. He throws a lot of power, actually. In fact, like, he was fighting at 170 pounds against David Robbins, and it was a pretty cool fight. Like, David Robbins was 7-0. He was expected to win, and Trevor Peek comes in, lands a really nice leg kick, lands just a couple of really nice shots, and David Robbins kind of backs up against the cage, and then Trevor Peek unloads a combination on him and just finishes him off with some brutal ground and pound as well. Does a very similar thing to Warren Smith. Somewhat similar thing to Conor Worthy as well, except the fight does last a bit longer. But this guy at 155 pounds has some crazy power, does Trevor Peek. But one guy that I think that should be able to win the fight, man, is Malik Lewis. He went 7-0 as an amateur, and then since then he did build up his record a little bit, and then he took up a big jump up in competition against Marcus Vinicius. To be fair, Vinicius has lost since then to a not so great opponent, but it's still a good win. And that first whole round against Marcos Vinicius, he's holding Marcos Vinicius up against the cage, looking for a takedown. He doesn't give up on the takedown. He doesn't actually get it in the end. Marcos Vinicius at the end of the first round ends up getting a takedown. But he showed that he's looking to wrestle. He showed that he's not going to give up on a takedown if he commits to it. And he also showed that he's a good grappler. He got a really good submission win over Vinicius. He locked up a triangle choke when he was on bottom, actually, from a takedown Vinicius got. And Vinicius just tapped instantly, which was very interesting. But yeah, I think that Malik Lewis, I like what I'm seeing out of this guy, man. I like the fact that he's showing a lot of grappling, he's showing a lot of wrestling in his recent fights, and I think that's what he's going to need to bring against a guy like Trevor Peek, who has finished almost all of his fights in the first round. And what we know about a lot of guys that finish fights in the first round is their cardio or their durability, I guess, in the second and third round just isn't tested. We have seen it so many times in Dana White's Contender Series. So many guys do have KOs in the first round, and now they end up in the Contender Series, and they come up against an opponent that's testing them, and they wilter a little bit. I don't think Trevor Peek's one of those guys. I think that Trevor Peek's amazing. I think he's great, but I think that Malik Lewis might be a tough matchup for him. And I'm picking Malik Lewis here as a very big underdog, I guess, in the Tapology picks. I think he might be an underdog when the betting lines come out. They're not out right now at the time of recording. I like Malik Lewis in this matchup. I like his wrestling. I like his grappling. I think he's going to clinch. I think he's going to wear on Trevor Peek for the whole first round like he did in his last fight. And I think in the second round is where he's really going to start to use his wrestling and his grappling. Maybe even try and get a couple of submissions. I think if Malik Lewis makes it Malik Lewis's fight, then he should win the matchup. But if Trevor Peek's able to defend all kind of grappling attempts from Malik Lewis and keep the fight on the feet, he's going to be very live for a KO. But Malik Lewis is a very good striker as well, and he's quite a good technical striker, where Trevor Peek is throwing bombs. He's throwing great leg kicks. He's just throwing great combinations in general, trying to knock you out. But if Malik Lewis is wise to it, I think he should look to clinch and let just grind on Trevor Peek for the first round at least, and then kind of work from there. I like Malik Lewis in this matchup. I think he should be able to get the job done by submission at some point, probably in the second and third round. And the next fight that we've got is Ikram Aliskerov taking on Mario Sousa. And this is Mario Sousa's third time fighting at Dana White's Contender Series. And off the top of my head, I don't think anyone has ever fought 3 times in Dana White's Contender Series. So I guess Mario Sousa is setting a record. He won his first outing on the Contender Series in 2020. And then he fought Chidi Njokwani, who has actually gone on a pretty good UFC run himself. Lost that fight by ground and pound in the third round, and then he won the next fight by ground and pound against a 14-3 opponent, and then he had a couple of fights kind of fall out, and this 0-1 guy filled in for him, so I guess he built up his record a little bit off that win. But Ikram Aliskerov, you might recognize this guy's name, and he is the guy that was touted as the guy to give Khamzat Chimaev the most adversity in his fights before he ended up in the UFC, and I believe that fight lasted less than 2 minutes, so good for Ikram Aliskerov. But since then, Ikram's striking has improved so much. He's a very competent striker right now, but where this guy does thrive is his chain wrestling, is just wrestling and grappling in general. And where Mario Sousa thrives is his powerful striking and just his striking in general, but he is a very powerful guy. He's a long, rangy guy, stands at 6'3", with power in the hands. But Ikram Aliskerov is going to look to take him down, and Mario Sousa does not have the greatest takedown defense in the world, so it's a nightmare matchup for Mario Sousa here. His third time on the Dana White's Contender Series. He's 26 years old. He's won a couple of fights over one pretty good opponent, and now he just fights a nightmare matchup in Ikram Aliskerov. I mean, I feel like if Mario Sousa just has a really good showing, maybe Dana White just signs him, and then he signs the loser and the winner. But I think Ikram Aliskerov, this is going to be his coming out party here. I think he's going to take down Mario Sousa in the first round multiple times, take him down multiple times in the second round, and probably work to get a finish towards the end of the fight. I've got to go with Ikram Aliskerov. It's a nightmare matchup for Mario Sousa, and that's just how it is. Mario Sousa's definitely got opportunities with the power in his hands, but Ikram Aliskerov's striking is so much more improved than it was years ago. This guy's looking really good on the feet. He's coming off a unanimous decision win over a former UFC fighter, albeit quite past his prime, but a former UFC fighter, Nashon Burrell, for Eagle FC. And before that, he was beating a couple of good opponents, and he was 8-0 when he fought Khamzat Chimaev 3 years ago. So, yeah, maybe if Ikram Aliskerov gets signed, maybe Khamzat Chimaev has something to say, and then it kind of boosts his name even more. But when Khamzat was making his big come up, and I thought, man, Ikram Aliskerov, you know, he's won a couple of fights since losing to Khamzat. I thought maybe they were just going to sign him and kind of build him up there. But I think Aliskerov should beat Sousa. This is a nightmare matchup for Sousa here. It sucks, but it just kind of is what it is, unfortunately. I wish Sousa all the best, man. I like him. I like his attitude. 3rd time on Contender Series. That's fire, man. That's cool. No one's ever done that before. But I think that Ikram Aliskerov, he's just a nightmare matchup, and that's just what it comes down to. So I'm going to have to go with him. And in this next matchup, you've got Alan Bagoso taking on Farid Basharat in the main event, or the featured fight, I guess you would call it. And it should be a good one, man. Farid Basharat was meant to fight on the very first week of the Contender Series against a guy called William Sousa, who was 11-1 at the time. And William Sousa pulled out for whatever reason. I think it was like a botched weight cut or something like that. But anyway, Alan Bagoso steps in now. The fight, Farid Basharat is fighting on a later date. Alan Bagoso steps in. I think this is a tougher fight than the original one, man. I think that Farid Basharat should still win, though. I think he's got a very good, well-rounded skill set. But Alan Bagoso's got a lot of finishing ability. He's got a lot of finishing ability on the feet, and he's got a lot of finishing ability on the ground. This guy here, he's quite dangerous for 135, and he's quite dangerous in this matchup against Farid Basharat, because if Farid Basharat looks to go for takedowns, which I think is what he's going to do, Alan Bagoso does have a pretty nice guillotine. You know, he won by guillotine in one of his more recent fights. He's also won by guillotine earlier on in his career. He's won by heel hook earlier on in his career, and he does have a submission as an amateur as well. A couple of good defensive submissions there that he's won, and he's also won by KO in the first minute of the fight 2 times. So this guy's live. This guy's super live. And but I think that Farid Basharat's got the skill set to defeat him. Farid Basharat 5 submission wins on his record, most recently coming off a rear naked choke win in the 2nd round. Defeated a very experienced fighter in the fight as well. I think that Farid Basharat really should be able to win this matchup here. My mouse is doing strange things. You look at that. So just throw you guys off, throw off the We Want Picks fans a little bit. But yeah, throw off Angelo when he's watching this before he uploads it. What's up, Angelo? Yeah, I'm gonna be going with Farid Basharat on this one here. He's got a very well-rounded skill set, and so does Alan Bagoso. Alan Bagoso very live for a finish. But I think that Farid Basharat, I think on the feet, if he can keep his range, because he is going to be rangier, he's going to be bigger than Bagoso, and I think he's going to look to definitely utilize some of his grappling as well. I am picking Farid Basharat to win a decision in this matchup here. A submission is very live. He does like to go for a lot of submissions, but I think Alan Bagoso should be a little bit too smart for it, or just too defensively available. I guess the wording could be. I'm going with Basharat decision in this match one here. His brother Javid Basharat won his fight by decision to get into the UFC. I think that Farid probably follows that same footsteps, and I think he gets it done by decision. This one here, Javid Basharat, if you didn't know, is also undefeated. I believe he's 12-0, 13-0 in his career. And he's in the UFC. Farid Basharat, the younger brother of the two, looking to get in the UFC again. I think this is a good card. I think it's not as good as week number 7, but they're very hard pushed to beat week number 7. Let's be honest here. Week 7 was crazy good. That was a crazy stacked card. I think you've still got good fights on this one. Brandon Lewis versus Daniel Marcos will be a good fight. Malik Lewis versus Trevor Peak will be a good fight. Ikram Aliskerov versus Mario Sousa should be a good fight as well, and so will Alan Bagoso versus Farid Basharat. Bruna Brasil versus Mann should be okay, but I think that Bruna Brasil just kind of kickboxes from range, out volumes, man. Just looks a little bit better on the feet. Now the predictions. On Tapology, you've got not many people siding with me on Brandon Lewis. A lot of people picking Bruna Brasil with me. Not many people picking Malik Lewis with me. A lot of people picking Aliskerov, and a lot of people picking Farid Basharat. So that's kind of my picks for the day. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the We Want Picks YouTube channel. If you haven't already, subscribe to the We Want Picks channel. There is so much content on the We Want Picks channel. If you're a fan of UFC, if you're a fan of MMA, you're going to love We Want Picks. So subscribe to us. If you haven't already, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I know my Dana White's Contender Series videos are quite long for a quick picks video. I know that Angelo is able to kind of run through his UFC predictions a lot faster than I do for my Tuesday night Contender Series, but it's just my style, man. So hopefully you guys don't mind. thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I hope to see you next week for week number 9, where we have a 17-year-old Hal Rosas Jr. fighting on the card. Absolute insanity. I cannot wait for it. So thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.